So is there also an internal environment? There's an external environment. Well, of course there is. So in the business world, every organization has an internal environment, and that's basically all the elements within the organization's boundaries. So that immediately looks at all the employees, their skills, capabilities, potential, etc., all their talent. Same with the management, and also the corporate culture. Now, corporate culture defines employee behavior in the internal environment, and that helps us understand how well an organization will adapt to the external environment. So when we speak about organizational culture, what do we mean? Culture is defined as the key values, beliefs, understandings, and norms shared by members of an organization. It's a pattern of shared values and assumptions about how things are done. And it can be analyzed at 3 different levels, with each level becoming a little less obvious. So the first one is the visible level. Culture can be seen visibly. It is how we dress, how our organization is laid out, the symbols, the slogans, the ceremonies that we have, with what we recognize, how we recognize, etc. The difference from an open office plan with lots of plants to a cubicle based with high walls, etc. Culture can be at the next level, which is seen to be the invisible level. This is the expressed values and beliefs, not always observable, but can basically explain and justify what people do. So sometimes these can be seen in the stories or the language that we use. So for example, in some organizations, an hour lunch break means an hour lunch break. And in others, an hour's lunch break seems to mean more than that. That's all part of the accepted culture within the organization. And then thirdly, that some values become so embedded in a culture that members are no longer even aware of them. This is when culture becomes subconscious and just guides behavior and decisions without us even being aware of that. It's just how things are done. And then sometimes, unless you've actually worked in that culture, it's very hard for you to explain it to other people. So we often hear, well, you don't work here, you wouldn't understand. So what are some of the visible manifestations of culture? The symbols, what objects, acts, or events that convey meaning to others. So here's an example of an organization that has a big pyramid-shaped center, and this pyramid is all about collaboration. So they use this symbol to sort of demonstrate that collaboration is part of their culture. Then we have the stories that are told in organizations. So stories about, what happened in the past and what people did, that helps sort of push the culture that is accepted now. So there's an example of an organization, a department store in the States called Nordstrom, who actually took back a blouse that a customer tried to exchange after 2 years of buying it. And that certainly speaks to the customer service culture there, whereas in another culture that would just never happen. So any stories that we hear about what was, what is, helps to portray the culture that's there. The heroes, figures who exemplify the deeds, characters, and attributes of a strong corporate culture. So we may hear of Mr. So-and-so, who used to, you couldn't business with him. If you were late, what he would do, and they help exemplify what that culture is about. Interestingly, an example that's often sought is about a security supervisor who did not let the chairman of IBM enter the building because he did not have his ID. And this supervisor was actually, recognized and rewarded for following, what he's supposed to do at work. Now, some of you may be a bit young to remember, but once we had a security that didn't let a certain PS into a ministry because he didn't have any ID, and he was terminated. So again, just showing how our cultures differ from others, and how organizational cultures differ from others. Slogans, any phrases or sentences that we use that expresses a value. So for example, Averitt Express, our driving force is people, and they have that all over their trucks to show the value for people. So again, this slogan, maybe one is tattle, people, or whatever slogan that is used. But I want to make sure that this is not necessarily a marketing slogan, but for it to mean anything culturally, it really is seen to be true or perhaps not. Perhaps it's laughed at. Then we can look at ceremonies. What ceremonies do organizations have? What special events for, done for a specific audience? So for example, Mary Kay Cosmetics, they give gold pins to their high achieving sales. What do we recognize and reinforce in ceremonies in our organizations? Some are very ceremonial, some are not at all. So basically these are just visible manifestations of culture. And in essence, culture represents all the values and understandings that employees demonstrate. So if every organization does have a distinct corporate culture, then corporate cultures can be shaped. And one of the major findings in recent research is that a company's value is based on how it treats its own people. So finally, businesses are beginning to realize that the more that they can attract and motivate and keep good employees and recognize and reward good employees, the more that we are building the kind of culture that we want to have. And that organizations who can build these people-focused cultures tend to react much better to the external environment. But of course, these changes can't happen overnight. So it can't just be that yesterday we were haters and today the managers are all kumbaya. It doesn't work like that. It has to slowly change in all our policies and how we interact with people, etc. So this requires cultural leadership. So leaders need to articulate visions that employees can believe in, that defines and communicates some sort of values. And you will notice that some organizations actually do have core values. And these help an organization sort of define the values to which they expect people to behave, and therefore helps define the culture. Finally, a little word on high performance cultures, because in today's world, you want to be performing, you want to be achieving the goals of the organizations. So high performance culture, we're very clear that managers communicate their cultural values. It's not just about what goals and objectives they want to meet, but what do they expect of people in terms of behaviors, what values do they expect people to live by. However, if we're going to tell people that customer focus is one of our values, and when a customer complains, we as the manager stops and walk off, then our behavior is not in keeping with the company values, and therefore we've undermined the whole thing. So if managers are to speak about values, that they want to guide people's behaviors and stick up wonderful posters with core values, then they have to live it themselves. Okay? But when times are bad or times are difficult, these core values can really help guide behaviors and decisions. So in a nutshell, to summarize what we looked at, there's an external environment and an internal environment of any organization. The external environment is made up of the general environment, which are all the factors under PESTLE that affects an organization indirectly. And the task environment is the nearest or closest level to the organization, but still very much external. And that affects directly because it influences our operations and our performance. So that would be customers, suppliers, competition, and labor market. And then, of course, there's an internal environment, elements within the organization's boundaries, such as people, management, and of course, the biggie, corporate culture. So there's a little diagram that may help explain this better for those of you who like diagrams. So on the outside layer is the general environment, which are basically elements of PESTLE. The task environment is the environment immediately around the boundary of the organization, and then the internal employees' culture management. So as you know, for your second assignment, which is worth 20%, the environmental analysis, you need to conduct a PESTLE analysis on your chosen organization, which means you need to look at all the political, economic, sociocultural, etc. factors that you believe are currently having an impact or may have an impact on the organization of choice. And then after that, you need to do a task analysis. So whatever you came up with in the PESTLE analysis, or from whatever research you can find, what can you discuss about the current customers? Are they increasing? What about the competition, the suppliers, the labor market? And again, understand that there may be a lot of overlap between PESTLE and task. That makes sense. because they're all part of the external environment. But the idea is to basically analyze as much as possible what is happening in the PESTLE and the task environments of the organization. Take care, everybody. This is what we looked at today. Plenty things. Remember, do your reading. It's whatever is listed at the end of the course outline. It's probably chapter 2 or chapter 3 of your textbook. You don't have to have the latest edition of that textbook. Any edition will do. And of course, have a look at the YouTube videos provided. That will help you a bit more with understanding of external environment, even though they may use different terms, and then a little bit more detail on the PESTLE analysis.